Well, welcome. I just admitted several of you. We surely will have some more joining, but we thought we would get started. My name is Chris Opsel. I'm the Research Development Coordinator for the Social Sciences in CLA, and as such, I deal with a lot of DDRIs. Today, we are super pleased to have two faculty from different departments in the college here to tell you about the DDRI experience from their point of view. We have Jillian Monnier from Anthropology and Kurt Kipmuller from Geography. And then really this event is for you. So we really want this to be an opportunity for you to ask questions and to share wisdom. I know some people registered for this event have been through this process once already. You may be waiting for the ultimate feedback, or you may have already received it. And please, if you have insight to share in the process too, I think that's great for the benefit of the group. And so we really want this to be open. We want you to ask questions either in the chat or, turn your video on, raise your hand, just chime in. Jillian's going to do a brief PowerPoint first, and then after that, we just want to have a conversation. So please, if you have questions in mind, jot them down. We want to hear them. This is a great opportunity to consult some folks who may not be in your department or your program, but nonetheless have lots of experience with this competition and with grants in general. So please take full advantage. I will turn it over to Jillian now, and let's see if you can get the PowerPoint to work, or we'll figure it out.
Well, hi, welcome. So I will share my screen here. And okay, just to make sure that I can see my slides. All right, and thank you all for being here. So my remarks are a little bit off the cuff, and I spent a little bit of time thinking about what to talk about, what makes a strong DDRI, and also I teach a class, Anthropological Research Design, for graduate students that has as one of its main components how to write a good NSF proposal. And I think some of you have been in that class. But what I wanted to talk about first is what I think are common mistakes that graduate students make, and that I made myself when I was a graduate student thinking about writing a DDRI. And so here I've written, are you feeling utterly daunted? Because this is a really daunting process. And when you download and read that program Solicitation, there are so many parts of it. It seems extremely daunting. So you do have to break it down into small pieces. You have to try not to let yourself be daunted. But one of the things that is the most daunting is the idea that, as I've written here, first of all, assuming that the DDRI needs to be about your entire dissertation. And secondly, assuming that it's got to be the best, most earth-shattering question ever, right? That it's got to like solve the world's problems. And neither of these things is true. So, your dissertation, everyone's dissertation is different. Your dissertation probably has multiple components to it. And you don't need to explain your entire dissertation in your DDRI. Your DDRI should really be focused on a project. And that project, it might be the bulk of your dissertation. It might be 90% of it, or it might be 70 or 80% of it. So, I've written here, there's no such thing as a too small project. I've never read a grant proposal where I thought, no, this is way too small, like it's not worth funding it. I've never come across that. So make it small, make it focused. It doesn't need to be your whole dissertation. And secondly, your project description, as well as your dissertation for that matter, it doesn't need to be like an earth-shattering idea. It doesn't need to be the best, most original idea ever. I think that's what we all want, and that's what we all dream about when we're in graduate school, is that we're going to make just this huge, amazing contribution to the field. Some of us do, and hopefully, we do with our careers, but it usually doesn't happen all at once unless you're amazingly lucky. So you need to identify a real and important problem in your field, and your project needs to make a contribution to that problem. But it doesn't need to be huge, right? It should be small and focused, and it should be doable. Okay, so what are reviewers looking for? This is a little bit of a different perspective, but if you can put yourself in the reviewer's shoes, that will help you guide you as you're writing your project description. They're looking for a good, no, I put a good, not a great, but a good, solid, and clear question. They're looking for an important question. Again, it doesn't need to be, this is going to save humanity, right? But it needs to be important in the field. They're looking for evidence that you know the background to the question, that you are thoroughly familiar with the literature and the research that has come before you, so that you know what's been done and what hasn't been done. They're looking for a project that is doable. So if it's enormous, if it's unfocused, it's not going to come across as doable. They're taking a risk by giving you the funding. And so they're thinking, well, what is the likelihood that you'll complete the work that you propose to do and have the results to show for it? So as you're writing, give them every reason to think that you've thought the whole thing through. This doesn't mean that you're not perhaps anticipating bumps along the way. There's always unexpected things in research, but you have a plan. You have a clear question and you have a plan. Here are some elements of an excellent proposal. So the quality of your project description is important. Your project description, which is your main proposal, it should be revised and polished until it's perfect, right? As perfect as you can get it. It should contain a clear main research question. It should describe why the question is important, and not only within the immediate field, but in a larger sense as well. It should present the results of prior research in the field. It should talk about what makes your project new or innovative or different or better than prior research in this field. So what is the central problem in earlier research that your project will correct? Your project should have a clear description of what your data set is and how you will acquire that data. It should have a clear description of your methods. And it should have a clear timeline of your project from start to finish, and make clear what aspects of your timeline are already complete and what aspects you're hoping will be covered by NSF. So your timeline might contain, say, maybe 8 items. And if you can say, I've already done, number 1 through 4, NSF will cover 5 through 7, and then I'll do 8, then that's great, because then the reviewers know that you're already on your way. Next, and this is my second to last slide, ask for help. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Send drafts of your proposal and the other documents, the other parts, the budget and the data management plan and so on and so forth. Send them to your advisor, giving your advisor enough time to read and respond to your draft, and then incorporate their advice into your revisions. And then send them your revised draft, and keep doing it. Keep sending them revisions as long as they're willing to read them and comment until they say, okay, this is just about perfect, go ahead and send it in. Also, don't be afraid to send it to somebody else. If there are maybe issues with your proposal, sometimes it's identifying your research question is the hardest part, and sometimes that's extremely difficult, and it helps to have more than one opinion. Okay, and finally, don't ignore the nitty-gritty details. And what I mean by that is give yourself plenty of time to log on to the FastLane website well ahead of the deadline and familiarize yourself with all of the different parts that you're going to have to enter in, because all of that stuff is time consuming. Download the program solicitation for the program that you plan to apply in. It's usually a PDF that's quite long, 20 or 30 pages, but it has the instructions for how to apply for the grant. So this is extremely useful, and you should read it. When you're reading the solicitation, familiarize yourself with what's called the merit review criteria, because this is what are the criteria that the reviewers are asked to abide by when they review your grant proposal. And so you want to know that your proposal, that your project description, and all the other parts of your proposal, that they will help that reviewer say, yes, the proposal does this, 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 and this. And then again, if you have questions, ask for help. You might have questions about the budget. You might have questions about the data management plan. Look around through the university. Use the resources, like Chris, for instance, that are available to ask. And you'll eventually find somebody who will be able to answer your question. Sometimes you won't. And so in that case, don't hesitate to send an email to the program officer at NSF who administers, who's in charge of the grants for your program. They are usually very happy to talk with applicants. If you've done your homework, if you have a clear question, and of course you have to be polite, they will be more than happy. And those kinds of conversations can be extremely beneficial. And that's it for my slides. So I will stop sharing. Here. All right.
Thank you, Jillian. That was super helpful. Kurt, do you have things to add?
Yeah, I'll just echo some of what Jillian said. And first of all, the students that are in this right now, you should all get these slides and you should use them a lot. Because I think that when students start out in this process, and just a little bit of background, so I have had, I think, over the years, maybe 8 PhD students. I think I've been here 16 years, and I don't take a lot of PhD students for a lot of different reasons, but my PhD students tend to put in a DDRI at least once when they're here. And I think I've had 6 students get them, and that's pretty good, but I will also add that they almost never get them on the first try. And that can be challenging. And so first of all, don't ever be discouraged by a rejection of anything, because that's part of the process and it helps you to learn. So I think that's one thing. And especially when you first look at the call here, it can be daunting at first. And I'm glad that you noted that we should look at the FastLane site, because that can be the first shot across the bow where you're sort of like, oh my gosh, this is real. There's a lot here I have to figure out, and it can be really, really daunting. So the first piece of advice that I would say that I think that most students that I've had they've made a mistake along the way, it's that they haven't started early enough, because it takes a lot of time to do this. And you think, oh, all I have to do is write a proposal. This is not like any other proposal. But writing a proposal like this will help you to write every other proposal you will ever have to write, because it really is about being concise, being direct, and being clear. And I think that is the key. You should be sharing this widely. You should be sharing it with your advisor, obviously, because in a sense, this project will get sort of filed underneath your advisor. It's a co-authored proposal. You might be doing all of the work and writing the proposal, but in the way it works within the system is that you are partnering with your advisor or with somebody else. Start early and get a lot of people to read it. I have a policy within my own lab group that proposals are read as a group. Everybody reads them, everybody provides comments, and that's the first sort of step for it. And then I of course give it a very, very careful read. But I also encourage my students to share it with other professors within our department that may not be in their field. And in some cases, it may be a professor they've had a class with, a writing class or otherwise, and just to get an opinion from somebody that's a little bit further away from the research. Because if they can understand what you're trying to do and why it's important, that means the people that are going to be reviewing this once it gets sent to NSF will understand it as well. And I think that that's something that's oftentimes lost, where a proposal might have way too much detail. And I think that there's got to be a really important balance there, but detail that people aren't going to understand because they don't know the whole process. So the idea to pick out a small part of your dissertation, that should be your first piece of advice, because if you go too big, then a reviewer's going to look at it and say, well, there's no way they can do all this work. But if you put it within the context of your overall dissertation and the overall field of study, then they'll see like, oh, wow, this little part, and it's probably not little, trust me. I know that you're going to be making something very big seem very small, and that can be kind of hard. But they're going to look at this, they're going to say, this is a doable project with a really good idea and a really good research question. If you put 9 research questions in there, these are all of the things I'm going to answer, it'll be too big. So be really careful about how you frame your project. Make it small, make it really direct, and try to get as much feedback as you can along the way. I think that's key. That's really key. But if you can share outside your own sort of group, I always encourage my undergrads too, but that they should be sharing their writing with their roommates, because their roommates probably don't have any idea what they're doing. And if they can understand it, then that's a good thing. And so you want to make this stuff sort of understandable and easily digestible by reviewers. So that's probably my biggest point. Then just to take a deep breath, because when you start this, it can be overwhelming. All of a sudden you're hearing about things you didn't even know existed, sponsored projects, NSF, directorates, and you see these names go by, like the directorate of SBS, whatever the NSF program you're applying to is. These are people that are there to help you, and you might think, oh, I can't bother these people with these little questions. That's their job, and they love it. They love to talk to especially graduate students that are doing this work. So touching base to get things clarified, or to just say, hey, I have this idea, does this make any sense? They can help guide you through that process. So that's something else that I think is really important. So that was a great overview, though. I don't even know what I can add with respect to writing the proposal. The only thing I would add is that, so of the students that have done DDRIs with me, first of all, I will also say that if you submit one and it gets rejected, don't be discouraged, because some of the best DDRIs I've seen go through, the ones that I really thought they were 100% going to get supported, didn't. And it's just that it depends on so many different factors. What other proposals are in the hopper with yours? Priorities at the directorate. Who gets it for review? That's the other thing. So don't be discouraged if on your first shot it doesn't go as well as you had hoped. Use the feedback you get to improve it and send it back in. But I oftentimes, if I have graduate students, and I do sort of hard sciences research, sort of, and I've had students that have used a little bit of field data as a pilot. And you have to be careful with that, because you don't want to give away too much, number one, and number two, you don't want to, it's got to be pretty good, because if it's sort of mediocre research or mediocre data, then that might sort of torpedo your chances too. But sometimes that pilot research, if it's couched correctly, can actually be really helpful to help reviewers see that, like, okay, this person has done their homework, they have a good idea, it seems to work, they just need to be able to go out and do more of this. If you can pull in pilot data, I think that can really strengthen a proposal. It's not necessary, though. You can write a perfectly good proposal without ever having stepped into the field if you have some really good foundations for building that. But starting early is a big thing, because I know that the one place that my students always get hung up every time is when it comes time to trying to write their budget out and write it in a format that's acceptable and getting things approved. So working through the sponsored projects office can be really challenging, because they have very tight and very strict time deadlines. So if you try to write a DDRI the 2 weeks before it's due, then you may as well not start. you really do need to be thinking about this as a semester-long project because it does take a lot of time. I just looked to see, because I was curious. The last one I worked on with my graduate student, we had 9 different revisions. So it's normal, and that's with other students. So the first revision was with 4 of us. I think there were 4 or 5 that read it, and then she shared it with a couple of faculty members, and then we came back, and I think the last revisions with just me, I think there were 4 or 5 different revisions, and she got it. But that's good, and I don't mind doing that, and your advisor will probably be perfectly happy to do that as well. Maybe not 9, but there is a reason I only have a few graduate students so that I can do some of this stuff. But it's good to share it widely, and it's good to get feedback. I'm sure other things will come to into my mind as we talk about this stuff too.
We have a question in the chat that I don't actually know, but you two might. Are there multiple stages of review for the DDRI, or do they just sort of all get had at once and for all?
That's a good question. I haven't been on a DDRI panel, so Kurt, have you?
I haven't, but from what I know, it's changed a little bit. I think now they have the rolling submissions, at least within GES. So, but I think the way it used to work, and I'm assuming it still might, is there's a pre-review when it comes in by maybe just the directors to see if it meets the requirements, and then it maybe gets sent out. So I don't know how strict that first part is or what they're looking for, but usually they get them and they send them out. Because I also think that, and it depends on what branch of NSF you're sending it to, but I think one of the ideas, at least within social and behavioral sciences and geography, is that those are an opportunity to provide some strong feedback, whether the student has something that's maybe DDRI quality or not. At least they might be able to get some feedback to improve their projects going forward. That's the way I've sort of read it. But I don't think it's formally a multiple stage review.
But there's probably, at least the way that it works with senior grant proposals at the NSF is that first the applications are sent out to reviewers, maybe 6-ish, and so the reviewers read it and then score it according to the merit review criteria. And then there's a panel that meets, and the panel, each individual, well, not everyone on the panel, but some members of the panel will also review the grant proposals. And then the panel will discuss each proposal in turn. So the members of the panel who have read the proposal, and usually there's at least 2, will present their summary of what all of the reviewers said about it and their own take on it, and then the panel discusses, and then all of the proposals are ranked, and then depending on how much money is available in the budget, there might be enough money for the top, I don't know, just going to make up a number, top 3 or 4, right? So they have to draw the line somewhere. And then that's where, as Kurt mentioned, you might have had an excellent proposal, but if it happened to be in a year where there were 5 other excellent proposals, and yours was ranked A-, and there were 5 that were ranked A, or A/A-, then you might unfortunately not get it that year because of things like that.
Yeah, actually, it's hard because in some cases you get your reviews back and you have an A. I mean, it's clear you have an A. You have great reviews and they're positive, and there's shuffling that goes on at the panel level where they look at priorities, they look at how much impact is this going to have. So you've done a great job, but they still have to say no because there is a line that has to be drawn. There's a budget that's there. So I think that's a really, really good description of how the process works in terms of the submission comes in to NSF. NSF will send it out to 4 people or so to get a review back from outside, and it comes back and it's reviewed in the committee. I don't know relative to how it works for full faculty versus the DDRI. I don't know what the difference is in terms of the numbers of people that review it or not, but I know that the panel, DDRI panels, I think tend to take a little bit more time on the review. So I think that there's less external reviews, fewer external reviews, but I'm not positive on that. It could be different. There's a hand up, and I wondered if there's a hand up and a question.
Oh,
Yes, I do. I do have a question. I am wondering if you could talk about the specific budgeting. I'm still quite early in my PhD program, and I have been applying for fellowships and things like that, but I have not applied to any specific fellowships or grant that would need you to specify an amount of money that you need. Could you talk about some of the things that you take into considerations that that would total into that final amount that you're proposing for? Does that make sense?
I think that's a great question. And it's very, I think, probably field dependent. And so I'm not sure what department you're in. Because it's so specific to the field. For instance, I'm in the anthropology department and I'm an archaeologist. So I advise students who their research might be, going to Tanzania for a year and doing field research for 3 months and needing to pay a couple of workers and rent a truck and things like that. But someone else might be doing ethnographic research in Minnesota and so their expenses will be entirely different. So it's really going to depend upon the field. And so I would speak with people in your field first and try to get a hold of DDRIs that have been funded. Some departments will keep we have like a Google Drive folder where we put many of our grants, both from faculty and students that have been funded. And those are really useful examples. So try to look at examples. And then probably Chris will also be a really good resource for you.
well, and there are certain things too that these grants will always fund and will never fund, right? So like you can never ask for tuition, for example, but you can always ask for travel expenses related to your project. You can ask for supplies, equipment, if there's data analysis software, for example, participant stipends. So, like Jillian says, it really depends kind of the contours of that on your department, your discipline. But this also gets back to reading the solicitation really carefully, because it will say the following are allowable, the following are not allowable. And then my team can help you sort of shoehorn your project into that according to the university rates and that kind of thing. But there are contours and there are parameters around what you can ask for, but we're here to help. And like Jillian says, your department will have examples as well. I mean, the sociology ones were literally just awarded like last week. And one of the ones I heard back from 2 students I had helped, and one of them, she literally was using the entire thing to buy a single data set, access to data. That was it. Her budget was like the simplest budget I'd ever seen, right? The other one actually had kind of a twofold plan, which I thought was really savvy. Ideally, her project would have taken her to a couple countries in Africa to look at how schools teach about human rights. And so she had a lot of travel expenses. She had a lot of, not only flights, but ground transportation, also incentives for people she was going to interview. But then she also had kind of a plan B that had to do with analyzing texts instead. And so in that case, she had qualitative data analysis software that would permit her to do that. So she had a couple different approaches because of COVID, because of what was going to be feasible at the time she was funded. And so, but these are all things that are very doable. You just need to sort of spec out your project and figure out what the associated expenses are, and we can help you render them in terms that the university and NSF will understand.
Yeah, I always think that, and Jillian sort of touched on this, because every budget's going to be different. And I always think that students, before they start working on it in too much detail, should just sit down and say, okay, what do I need the money for? And then think about what NSF will help you support. For my group, it's almost always travel support to be doing field work. That's the big thing. But I bet that, Jillian, you probably need money for like AMS dates or something like that, for radiocarbon dating or things like that. So it changes a lot. We also oftentimes need support to help. We explicitly oftentimes will ask for support for undergraduates to help do field work. And we look at that as an opportunity to help with education, help undergraduates learn what we do and think about what they might want to do later. So we usually try to build some of that into, but you can't, like Chris said, you can't do tuition. There's certain things you cannot do, but travel seems to almost always take up the lion's share of our budgets. Once you start to figure out like per diem, airfare, all of these things, rental of a vehicle, it sucks the budget up pretty quick. And these are not gigantic. Let's be realistic. This is not a lot of money when it comes to supporting work. When you actually sit down and think about how much it costs to do research, it adds up fast. And so these are not enormous budgets that you have to work with. And so especially like if you're going to Tanzania, then your budget's going to get shot pretty quick just by buying airfare. So I think that's really key. And it's the fact that in CLA, we have people that can help with the budgeting process. That's huge. And that's something that you guys, when you're writing this, should be tapping into as quickly as you can. It can get complicated for sure. And then indirect and overhead. And I can't remember, there's still overhead on DDRIs, right? Yeah. So that's something else.
It's not, it's over and above the 20K, I think. So it's not, it doesn't infringe on the amount you get. It's in addition to, so.
But it's good to know that these things exist, because I know that I have just had a conversation with my grad student about a proposal and was explaining the whole process of indirect costs, which is cost sharing that the university has. And the university has a pretty high rate, but most research ones do. And it means that if you write a budget for a certain amount, the budget's actually going to be larger than that because you have to add this overhead on top. So there's stuff like that that's important to think about, and you won't think about it until you write a proposal. And so this process, actually, just doing this is, I think, a good practice to understand what part of your career may very likely be.
We have a question here. We've had a couple more, but I don't want to lose track of this one. So what if we've already started some of the data collection? Does that improve or weaken our chances? And I would add another layer to that, which is, how do you time this, right? Because NSF and these disciplinary associations have inherently like 5 to 9 month lag. And so if you've already started something, do you have to stop that thing and wait for 9 months? Or how do you meet out the project so that your work isn't hampered, and yet if you get this money, you can actually do with it what you promised them you would do?
I think if you've started to collect data, that's not a bad thing, and it might well be a good thing, because then you can write your proposal even more clearly because you already know what's involved with collecting that data. But you still want to present a proposal that is a self-contained proposal. So think about, maybe, again, as an archaeologist, I'm familiar with sites. So let's say your project involves collecting data from 5 sites. And you've started. So in your proposal, say, well, you can even present it as pilot data, right? I've collected data on 1 site already, and now I need money to do the other 4 sites, or something like that. Yeah, I'll stop.
I'm a big proponent of pilot data, and I think that the way that Jillian just put that too. If you have 5 sites and you've collected 1. I think that's so helpful, because they can see like, oh, well, yeah, if this student had another 4 sites, this is going to be great. So I'm a huge proponent of having some pilot data. We sort of think of them as proof of concept, right? Like, here's what we want to do, and here's why we think it'll work. Here's a little bit of data to show that it works in this one place, but does it work over here too? So I think I don't think pilot data ever hurts your chances unless you're including it and not including other key aspects. I think that the first thing you want to do is make sure that what you're describing is well supported. And if you can do it without the pilot data, then maybe that's okay. if you don't want to include pilot data just to include pilot data, you need to make sure you have a really, really tight proposal. This will be, and I think that this is an accurate statement, that NSF proposals are probably going to be the tightest proposal you'll ever write, because they have to be really direct and there's page limits. So you learn quickly how to be concise with your writing. And that's probably, I know when I started out as a grad student, and even now I have a hard time with this. Trying to like drop words from something is hard. It's really, really hard. The efficiency is challenging. So taking classes where you do this, like if there are specific courses you can take to learn how to write, and it sounds like Jillian, sounds like you have a good one. And so if you have classes, or if you can take a class on how to write a proposal, just having that practice is really, really important. And I know there are a couple that have been offered through CLA, and most departments have them. But being an efficient writer, especially for an NSF DDRI, that's huge. So if you can get the pilot data in, great. But if it's not necessary, you shouldn't worry about it.
Well, and just to add to, some of the disciplines here are not super quantitative data focused, but there are other ways to pilot your project, like if you already wrote a paper on a topic related to your dissertation for a class. For example, I'm thinking of some of our sociologists, you know, that demonstrates the feasibility of your topic, right? If you can say, I've already dipped my toe into this, I've already interviewed some people, for example, that's another way to get sort of preliminary data on your project. Jillian did clarify, yep, conference travel may not be covered. And I assume when you say senior proposals, you mean like regular NSF faculty level.
Yeah, from faculty.
Yeah, which you can write grad students into and pay their tuition, but DDRIs, graduate.
Right, you can't ask for tuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You will also, Jillian had mentioned Fastlane, you will need an NSF login, which you'll have to get through the U, which will also take time. So this is another reason to be thinking ahead about your proposal. It has to be tied to you institutionally, and someone at the U creates that login for you. So that's another step in the process that you'll have to do. So again, another reason not to put off doing this or alerting my office that you're going to do it, because we can help you do that.
I just wanted to, Chris, if I may, I wanted to add something to what Kurt talked about.
Absolutely.
About, writing concise proposals, and then what you mentioned with other fields that are more qualitatively based rather than quantitatively based. And I would argue that it's still just as important to write a clear and concise proposal in those fields. I think that it is very useful to read examples of successfully funded proposals. And they don't have to be other DDRIs. I mean, I think if you know faculty who have received NSF funding, those proposals are very useful to read, because it's essentially the same reviewing mechanism for both the senior proposals and the graduate students. So if you read a senior proposal, it'll be longer, but it'll still give you a very good feeling for how to write a fundable proposal. I think that sometimes there's the impression that your proposal can only be you can only get good feedback from it from someone who's in your field. But as Kurt mentioned, give it to your roommate, give it to other people to read. It should be understandable and readable by educated people, even if they're not in your field. And I remember for myself that this isn't related to proposals, but when I was up for tenure, I had to write a teaching narrative and a research narrative, very short, concise documents for the promotion and tenure committee to read, and on, right up through the Board of Regents. These had to be like 1 page. And I received some of the best feedback from some of my colleagues in the department who are not archaeologists, but who are cultural anthropologists. So do, you know, if try to seek feedback from people that you think, you know, are educated and should be able to understand what you're doing without necessarily being exactly in your tiny field.
I think that's probably the most important part of the proposal writing process, is trying to make sure that it can be understood clearly by a broad audience. And, you know, I know anthropology and geography are similar in that is a broad audience. And so it's important to write a proposal that doesn't require the reader to take a step back and try to figure out what's being said. And reading other proposals that are successful, and Jillian's right, it can be any successful proposal. It doesn't have to be an NSF proposal, because I think the process and the practices will be the same, but they have to be really, really clear and concise, and they have to be free of jargon to a large extent. I know based on what I do, there's a lot of things that I just don't bring up, because it's stuff that would take me 3 pages to explain the historical background of that part of it. Especially with statistical stuff, you know, I don't get into the weeds on different statistical testing. And actually, and this is why it's really important to read a whole bunch of proposals, because you can all of a sudden see how people have streamlined their project. I remember the very first, I was funded as a graduate student on an NSF proposal that was written by my advisor and several other faculty. And when I got it as a graduate student, before I started my PhD, I read it, and at first it took me a while to figure out what the heck they were trying to do, because I could see what they wanted to do, but I couldn't see how they were going to test anything, because they had very vague, very superficial language. Now I know why, because you can't always go into that level of detail in a 20-page or a 12-page proposal. And so I think that seeing how, especially if you're reading proposals that maybe were produced by your advisor, so you're close to the field, so you know the sort of the inside baseball, inside scoop stuff, you know, like how they've kind of walked that very, very fine line. And I'll be honest, it takes a lot of practice to figure out where that line should be drawn, because in some cases you have to use particular terminology to key or signal that you know what you're talking about. In other cases, you don't want to go overboard, right? You don't want to go so far down a rabbit hole that you lose the readers, right? And it's a really, really fine line. And I probably don't have really good advice for how to walk that, because I think it depends on every individual proposal in field.
I like to tell people that they need to educate their readers. So you need to sort of take your reviewers by the hand and lead them through your topic. I think it's, you know, some people might think, wow, that's really sort of pedantic, or it's dumbing down my work, or it's not showing the full range of my expertise. And Kurt, you're right, it may not be. Mm-hmm. It's a different style of writing. Grant writing is very pragmatic. It's very task-oriented. I'm going to do these things. You are funding me to carry out certain activities. And you need to describe why those activities are important, what they're going to add to your field. But unlike scholarly writing, you are not putting a fence around your subfield and saying, here are the insiders and here are the outsiders. You have to embrace all your reviewers. Everyone is an insider. And help them learn about your topic, help them learn about why it's important. Because you can't presume hardly any background. I mean, you guys, your fields are super broad, and it's hard for agencies to find reviewers. So they take people from a wide range of subspecialties. And so, yeah, have everyone read it. You can get your hands on for sure. Are there other things that you two can think of in terms of how grant writing might differ from scholarly writing? Because I think it's a whole nother enterprise you have to take on at the same time as you're learning, like, the discourse of your field for journal articles, right? Which is a different thing. So if you have any other tips about that, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has a potential. It depends on your field, but it has a potential to be extremely different. And, you know, in some fields, the writing, you know, in anthropology, for instance, some writing is almost literature or poetry, and it's very beautiful, but you would want to write differently, obviously, for a grant proposal. So you want to make it clear, and you want to make it easy to read. I think what's perhaps a little bit tricky with NSF is that the reviewers will be people who are in your field, in your direct field. So you don't, so you do need to convey, as Kurt said, that you know what you're talking about, and it needs to be written for a specialist, but at the same time, the panelists, then, you know, that panel evaluation, they might be one step away. So if you are someone who studies butchery practices on animal bones, and that's what your proposal is about, the reviewers will be people probably who do that kind of work. But then the panelists, they might be archaeologists who are qualified to review your proposal, but who are not exactly in, you know, in that particular field. So you don't want to use so much jargon that they don't understand what you're doing. So you have to walk a fine line. But this is where, as Kurt said, writing multiple drafts and revising it will really help you.
Yeah, I always think back to, I review a lot of NSF proposals as an external reviewer, and I've been on panels before, and I always remember I do tree ring work and I work in forests. That's basically what I do. And so I feel like I have a very narrow field of expertise. I might be selling myself a little short, but I get reviews that might be about, or I get proposals that might be about animal movement, or about, I'm trying to think of one of them, remote sensing. So using, you know, satellites to monitor vegetation change. And I get them to review because they need people to review these, and they explicitly are looking for external opinions, I guess. And oftentimes, if I get something and I can't understand what they're trying to do, it's not because not because I don't know anything. It's oftentimes because they haven't been clear in a way that will appeal to a broader audience. Even though I've seen other ones that are super complicated, but I get it. And it's a really hard line to toe to show that you know what you're doing, but not go overboard. And having people outside your field, or in the field but outside your little circle of expertise, is really, really key to producing a high quality proposal that's got a good shot at getting funded.
Well, and even I think sometimes those people are just not familiar with your work.
Yeah.
People who are very close to you in a scholarly way probably have been in class with you. They've heard about your project before, so it's familiar. And so even to get fresh eyes is super valuable. One of you had mentioned that, I think, Kurt, that when you apply, if you aren't funded, you get feedback. Yeah. Do you have any tips for handling, processing, incorporating, dealing with that? And sometimes it's not all good either, right? Like, how do you decide what to take on or not, etc.?
There's always that moment where you say, this person just didn't get it, right? I mean, honestly, you have to be ready for getting some really, really critical feedback. Sometimes it might not seem like fair feedback either. So you have to understand a little bit about how people are going about reading these things too. I think that when a panel or a reviewer has, 4 to 10 proposals to read, they're making very short comments that might not come off as being very constructive. And so I think that you need to just be aware that that's not necessarily what's being, sometimes it's not expressed as critically or constructively as it could be. That's one thing I would say. However, you also often find that you get really good feedback. Like if you have 3 reviews and they all point to the same weakness, that's going to be really helpful. You're probably going to want to address that. So you do have to kind of I don't know. I always tell my students to sort of steel themselves for what they're going to get. And I show them actually what I've had in the past for my own proposals, because I want them to be aware what they might get. It can be a little jarring. Rejection's not good. Nobody likes that. And so you got to be able to pick out the silver linings. And that's something that I would encourage you to do with your advisors, because I think that your advisors can help walk you through and help you interpret what you're getting back. Because if you're getting that email with those proposal or review comments in it, and you're by yourself, and you open it up and you read it, it can ruin your weekend, and that's really unfortunate. And I've had a lot of moments with grad students over the years where we've been rejected on a proposal, and you gotta really try to stay positive, because sometimes it can be hard. And it's not that your proposal, I want to emphasize this again, it's not that your proposal's bad, it's that there's a lot of good work going out there, and people have to draw a line somewhere. So take a deep breath, because honestly, like, you can find the silver lining in these reviews, and it'll be helpful. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sitting here in the back of my head thinking, gosh, I have proposals out there right now that I haven't gotten feedback back from yet. This is going to be fun. So yeah, it can be hard.
Yeah, and I want to add that, getting back to what Kurt said when he first was talking, to not let rejection stop you, and in fact to consider it not as the end. When you get rejected, that's not the end. That's rather the beginning. It's the beginning of this sort of iterative process where you're going to send your proposal out, and it's the same works with publication, right? When you're publishing, you send out what you've written, you get it back with comments, and you have to make changes, and you have to revise it, and then you send it back out again. And so it's a long, tedious process. It can be discouraging, but do not see it as the end. And that was a mistake that I made, and when I was a graduate student. And it's too bad that my advisor, I don't know why, didn't encourage me to reapply. He should have, but I was rejected from scholarships and from grants, and I was crushed. And I thought, I'm just never going to get grants. But that's not true at all. It's the people who get them are the ones who persist. And so you have to keep persisting, and it'll happen.
Well, and I feel like the worst thing too is you put in all this time to some funders and you don't get any feedback. And even if it's terrible, even if it ruins your weekend, like, feedback is a gift. Like, use it to move forward, use it to learn the trade, use it to move ahead, do what you can with it, steel yourself, like Kurt said, but like, it's meant to help you. And I think especially people who review for grad student competitions, like, they know they're teaching you. They're trying to socialize you into this enterprise of grant seeking. So take it in that spirit, really. And the vast majority of grants are not funded on the first try, regardless of funder anymore, ever. So it's just normal to like not be funded the first time.
And I feel like DDRI reviews, at least in my experience, have always been way more constructive than the senior proposal reviews. And that might be just because I hope that most of it's because the people that are doing the reviewing understand what they're reviewing and who the folks are that are writing these, and that they're students. But I don't know if that's the case. I hope that's the case. Senior reviews tend to be a little harsher, because I think that the stakes are pretty high. There's not a lot of money or whatever, but those can be really hard. So just students go through this, but so do faculty. Like, rejection is hard for everybody, for lack of a better way to put it. So I don't know. I do think you have to look at proposal reviews as being constructive, even if the comments are harsh. They're meant to help. And really, if you get rejected on a proposal submission, you should be really strongly considering resubmission. Like I said, most of my students haven't gotten them on their first try. they get them on their second try. Sometimes I think a student's got the best proposal ever and it gets rejected twice. And that's kind of hard. That's really hard. Especially when their advisors say, no, this is great. I can't see how this is going to be rejected. We don't always know either. But going through it the second time, if you can incorporate some of the challenges or the changes or the suggestions and then mention it in the resubmission, like a previous review pointed out this is a problem. Here's what we think we can do to fix it. That's a huge bonus because that tells reviewers that they've done this before, they got some feedback, and they're taking that feedback seriously. So
we probably have time for one more question. If there's a participant that has something you want to ask before we are done.
I would almost say that this is obviously not a question, but Chris, I don't know if you guys have over in CLA, if you have like a list of people within CLA that would be willing to kind of help look at DDRIs, like if you have a list of faculty that like are on call. I know during the pandemic's a little different. That's actually something I should point out too. But it's, people's workloads are really, really high, but during a normal semester, I look at a lot of DDRIs just from students within our department that aren't in my field just to try to help out where I can. A lot of them are my TAs, so they know me pretty well. But it'd be really, if sometimes students are a little apprehensive about sharing their work within their own department for whatever reason. And so I guess I'll just offer this up that I'm pretty easy to find. My email is just Kurt, K-U-R-T. And if I can, and if I have the time, and I probably won't have any time between now and the end of the semester, given workloads right now, but I would be willing to try to chat with people and maybe give things a quick read and a quick overview too. And I think I know my students do that all the time with their peers. So, I don't know if you guys have that over there in CLA or not, but one thing I do want to say about the really quickly about the pandemic stuff is it makes it harder to plan. And that is a challenge. And I know that right now, writing DDRIs and other grant proposals with my graduate students has been a huge challenge because people can't plan ahead or they can project. So hearing how the one student did it is where they had a backup plan is really, really interesting and useful.
Well, and I think too, I've reviewed, kind of the normal amount of proposals this year, and often it feels conspicuously absent when people haven't addressed COVID. And so
yeah.
Even to have one line that says, and depending on the funder, depending on the level of specificity, depending on the length of the narrative, right? Sometimes you just don't have room to say any more than that, than to say, if the pandemic persists, I will reconsider my travel plans, right? I mean, just acknowledge that it's out there and that you've thought about what might happen to my project, if this goes on for a while. One note, we don't have a list of faculty who are willing to read things, but part of my job is review, like to be an outside reviewer. So that's something that my office does. I'm sort of like Jillian said, the educated person who's brand new to the topic. If you can make it make sense to me, like that's also helpful, right? So, and that's my job. Like I'm here to read things for you. So absolutely happy to help with that. I typically only do one round with folks unless it really needs some deep tissue massage. By the time people get to me, they've been through their advisor. And so mine is more the fresh general read as opposed to the, discipline adherence kind of read. But anyway, don't hesitate to reach out on that front at all. Any concluding remarks, either of you?
No, but just I'm also happy to be a resource for these, reading proposals or answering any questions.
Well, it's fun too, I think. I mean, I get to learn about like what other people are doing within our college, and like it's so cool to see how broad people's ideas are. So like it's effort, but it's fun effort. That's the good thing. And I love reading good proposals that I can understand like where somebody's coming from, especially when they're not in my field. So I don't know.
Especially with graduate student research.
Especially with graduate student research, because oftentimes graduate students are the ones that are reading the papers that I have stacked up on my desk that I haven't read yet. So it's like, oh, great, I really do have to read this paper.
Right.
So,
You're at the cutting edge.
yes, I mean, I think that is part of it. So it's really, it's a fun process.
Well, that's it. I mean, I feel like it's helping people's ideas speak through better. So when we review things, you know, it's helping sort of clear out the underbrush and really let shine what people are trying to do. And then when they get funded, of course, it's awesome. But we understand they don't always, and we're happy to help them try again. So that's just how the game goes. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to our participants. I hope you got your questions answered. This is being recorded, so it'll be posted to our website. We'll email out a link as well. So another round of applause for our presenters, and thank you so much.
Thank you
been
for the
helpful.
invitation. This
Yeah,
was
thanks a
fun.
lot for the invitation. It's fun to talk about fun stuff for a change.
Right? Right. All right. Well, have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for
You too.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.